Disclosure of an extraterrestrial presence on Earth is an old topic. It has been discussed and predicted for many years. Various deadlines have come and gone, and we have yet to see disclosure with a capital D. Steve Bassett defines this as a moment where the President of the U.S. appears in front of TV cameras and announces the government is having ongoing contacts with ETs. Clearly, this has not yet happened. The big question I want to explore in this video is, why not? Speakers at UFO conferences, people like Stephen Bassett, Richard Dolan, and David Wilcock say, we are ready for disclosure. And political advisors like John Podesta have said the same thing. Many people have offered detailed analysis about what may happen if and when we see disclosure. Richard Dolan's book, After Disclosure, is probably the seminal book on this subject. And I tip my hat to all of them for their research and deep thinking on this topic. I am not aiming to criticize the work of anyone, but I would like to put forward a different emphasis on some of the issues and give my own explanation of what issues I believe may be preventing the U.S. government from making full disclosure. In my review of this topic, I have identified 4 main barriers to disclosure. Some of these you may have heard before, but perhaps not all 4. Stephen Bassett may be right that disclosure could be forced upon the president under certain circumstances. He, Bassett, is working hard to engineer the political environment which would make it virtually impossible for the U.S. to delay disclosure any longer. In fact, he is now predicting what he calls an end to the truth embargo as soon as early next year, in the months after the 2014 election, when his efforts may be in full swing. But I believe this major event will continue to be resisted with full vigor unless and until some way can be found to cope with the major issues surrounding the 4 main obstacles. I will give each of these barriers a short and memorable name. This way, others may comment on these barriers in the notes to this video. The first barrier I call the fear of little green men. This is perhaps the easiest barrier for us to get past. But it was not always so. In the 1950s, shortly after the Roswell crash, there was a rash of UFO sightings. There was a fear that beings looking very different from humans would arrive in flying saucers and threaten our planet. Much of the fear was associated simply with their appearance. How could we trust or do business as usual with beings that look so different from us? If you look at films of the time, you will see these creatures arriving and threatening humans with their weapons and their claws. Since then, we have had decades of films showing creatures of various shapes and descriptions. And we have become accustomed to the idea that humans can work with creatures who do not look like us. Think of the Vulcans and the Klingons in the Star Trek series. And of course, the cute visitors in the film, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. What was once scary has now become commonplace in our imagination. And the Pope is even talking about how the Church would be willing to baptize beings from outer space. The fear, based solely on the different look of ET visitors, has faded. And when people say, we are ready for disclosure, this is probably what they are talking about. And it is no longer the biggest barrier. Hollywood films and TV series about extraterrestrials have reduced its impact. The second barrier involves the fears of those managing the cover-up. They call it, well, I call it, the legal risks for insiders barrier. During the many decades of the truth embargo, lies have been told, people have been threatened, and some lives have been lost to hide the truth of ETs. Insiders are worried that if disclosure happens, they may suddenly be at risk of legal action. Some may even be accused of murder and other serious crimes. This could be one of the biggest barriers preventing military and civilian insiders from supporting disclosure. Some pushing for disclosure, such as Dr. Courtney Brown and Colonel John Alexander, have suggested that a general amnesty be offered. And Richard Dolan has also spoken positively about such an idea, saying it would reduce the need to ask one of the most obvious questions: who has been running the cover-up and why? This is a very awkward question for those in the shadow government. So maybe we have to have a general amnesty to push things to the next stage. However, if we do have such an amnesty, we need to draw a line. Once the amnesty has been granted, all infractions after that date would no longer be forgiven, and maybe some various serious historical criminality, such as mass murder, might not be eligible for a pardon at all. Careful consideration of the issue and an announcement of the amnesty at the same time as disclosure may remove this important barrier. The third barrier relates to the agenda of the ETs themselves. I call it the dark secrets of the ETs barrier. Many different species are said to have had contact on our planet. Some are benevolent, and some are said to be hostile. The shocking thing that many may not want to hear is that some species of ETs may have an agenda to exploit humans. The possible forms of exploitation range from using human DNA obtained through abductions to using human ET hybrids as slaves to preying upon humans as a food supply. Such information may be very tough for humans to accept, especially if governments cannot provide a solution or convincing promises of security. A widespread sharing of such dark secrets could lead to panic or even a breakdown of the social order. The sort of chaos that was expected in the 1950s, simply from the look of ETs, might come if we all panic, when we learn some of them have a dark agenda, and they are truly dangerous to us all. The way to remove this barrier to disclosure is to formulate some effective protection and to share an understanding of why such dark agendas may even exist. Clearly, neither the people of the earth nor its government should be prepared to see humans harvested routinely as food for ETs. But if such things are going on, we should forge alliances with other ETs that can help to prevent it. And our government should also tell the people how to minimize the risk. If the risk already exists in our present world, isn't it better if our government admitted it and helped us find precautions rather than having people simply snatched with no warning and no understanding of the risk? This one requires a bit of courage and commitment to honesty. As John Podesta said, it's time to find out what is the truth out there. We ought to do it because it's right. and the American people can handle the truth. So said John Podesta. The fourth barrier that I have identified may not sound like a problem at all when you first hear about it. Why should we delay disclosure for such a reason, you may ask. But if you think about it more deeply, this really is an important issue. But I have rarely heard anyone speak of it as a problem. This barrier relates to fears we may have over how people might behave in a post-disclosure world. I call it the winner's curse. It arises when people suddenly gain something positive, like a financial windfall, and it changes their expectations and their behavior. It is often seen with lottery winners who suddenly have more money than they ever dreamt possible. Typically, they will quit their jobs and go on a spending spree. And the expectations and demands of those around them will change too. From this windfall, we often see negative things. Marriages break down, the fortunate people squander their fortunes, and some people are just unable to cope with the change, and some have even committed suicide. The new world for them is such a shock that they cannot cope, even though they have many new and exciting possibilities ahead of them. David Wilcock has spoken about life after disclosure. He has said that we will not need to worry about energy anymore. We can use the same abundant energy that ETs have used to power their interstellar travel. Nor will food or clothing items be a problem, because these essentials will be materialized from replicators, just as you see in the Star Trek. The problem is there will be a time of transition. We will not go instantly from the life we know now to the one described by David Wilcock. It will take 2 or 3 decades or more to get there all the way. And in the meantime, our planet will still have 7 billion people to feed and people with health care and other essential needs. If we all behave like lottery winners and quit our jobs as soon as the news is announced, our current world will grind to a halt, and there will be widespread suffering. We might be like the returning soldier who drops dead of exhaustion within sight of his home. How can we make it through the necessary transition? I think we can employ the same technique as some wise lottery winners use. Before touching a penny of their windfall, they get an education. Over weeks and months, they educate themselves about how to wisely invest and spend their windfall. They learn how to live sustainably and normally, with meaning and purpose, in a world of new possibilities. Among those who are already awake to the existence of ETs, we should be thinking of the educational program that should be available on the day of disclosure. This should include mundane subjects like why to continue doing your job, the financial requirements of getting to our limitless future, and the issues for raising families for a very different future. We will also have to learn how to deal with ETs and how to become valuable citizens within a galactic future, and maybe a galactic federation of planets. By the way, do we really need to wait for the day of disclosure to start thinking about these issues? Can't we start this education today? Maybe we need an organization. Education for a post-disclosure world, it might be called, to start addressing this need. What do you think?